Hi folks, good afternoon. I had a few people say that they're interested in talking to me, so I thought I should come and make myself available in the spirit of democracy. How can I help? Oh, really good. I mean, I think this treaty has needed a discussion for a long time, and I hope that tomorrow will actually provide another avenue for that.
Māori have said...
Beg your pardon? Well, I'm in two minds. I mean, let's see what the vibe of it is, and if there's an invitation from the organisers. I think if I sort of walk out there and they don't want to give me a chance to speak and so on, then you sort of wonder what you're doing there. But certainly, I welcome the opportunity in principle.
Do you consider?
Simply because it's their event. If someone's hosting an event, you usually let them run the show, the schedule, control the order of speakers and so on. So that's why I leave it up to the people who organise the event.
Māori have said that they
Yeah, look, I think for a lot of people it is, and I see what's on social media. Some people have views that I wouldn't quite agree with, or I don't think are really informed on what the bill's about. You've got to bear in mind too, there's a lot of people there for other reasons. I mean, there's quite a number of government policies that people have expressed disapproval of that they want to talk about, and there seem to be also people with other causes there as well. So, this is, not only is this a part of the conversation about the treaty, but I think the treaty principles bill is probably a part of the reason that people are on this hīkoi.
What do you make of the Māori Queen's involvement?
Oh, well, look, obviously I'm pleased that she's getting out and performing the role that she wants to perform.
Māori have said that they have had a national conversation for over 180 years at marae around the motu and invited Pākehā as well. What's the difference between that as a national discussion point and what you're saying?
Well, first of all, the Treaty Principles Bill is a bill before Parliament, and that's where the laws for New Zealand are made. For a long time that conversation's actually been taking place in the courts. Part of the argument of the Treaty Principles Bill is that if we're going to have a modern interpretation of those principles, a lens through which we look back to 1840 at what our treaty, our founding document means, then that should happen in a democratic institution like Parliament.
Why didn't you participate in any of those discussions around the motu that they had 4 or 5 times a year?
Well, actually I have at different times throughout my career.
What do you make of the international attention that this bill now has following the Haka in the House last week, and do you think that will help the cause or work against it?
Well, I think it's now plain for people to see. You've got someone getting up, making an argument for how we can have a better New Zealand, and a group of people who jump up, try and get in their face and do a war dance. I mean, people are judging that, and it's not always good for the way people perceive our country. However, ultimately, the responsibility for those actions lies with Te Pāti Māori and 3 MPs in particular.
But do you support the haka at the rugby games though?
Well, yes.
But then you don't support that haka. So you call that haka a war dance, but what do you call the haka at rugby games?
Well, it's also a war dance.
So what's the difference between that and what they had done?
Well, you asked about the perception around the world. I suspect that most people around the world would see it as a war dance because most people around the world are not familiar with our culture.
So what you're saying is it's okay in some context but not in that context?
That's exactly right. Parliament's a place where you're supposed to debate with words. We had a case earlier this year where an MP was censured for going over and waving, I'm doing the same thing right now, and waving themselves or waving a book at someone. And so, there actually are different rules and different activities in different places, and the start of a rugby game is different.
Performance to what was to the haka that took place last week.
Well, that's right. You've got in both cases a member of Parliament getting out of their seat, going over and trying to get into the space of another MP. And the whole point of Parliament is that it's supposed to be about debating with words and argument, not trying to get in people's faces. No, I wasn't, but I grew up in the north. I know what haka are about. However, I know the intention of them is to intimidate. And I just ultimately say to people, if you have to do a haka to get your point across, maybe you don't have a good argument.
There's a haka plan for tomorrow.
Well, you'll talk to tikanga experts who'll give you a variety of explanations. Well, I'm sure you could find them better than me. It can also be a sign of respect, but I think in this particular instance it was deliberately designed to undermine the functioning of Parliament, where people are allowed to speak on behalf of their constituents and put up arguments that the public can make up their mind on. Once you say that it's okay to physically intimidate people in Parliament by leaving your seat and trying to get in people's faces, you're undermining the rational debate that this place is built on.
Has the Speaker ruled in that way, David?
Look, if I was going to bring a privileges complaint, I wouldn't talk about it. The Speaker's rulings are very clear that you should not talk about privileges complaints that are being brought. However, it's quite possible. Beg your pardon? Well, if your logic is that because another ACT MP once did something different from what I'm proposing to do now, I need to tell you that whether or not I'm putting in a privileges complaint. Okay, so I'm not sure how the timing of it really changes the argument, but I'm not compelled to answer. Yep. Yep. The position of the ACT Party is that some people have publicised privileges complaints, and I'm not going to publicise this one if there was one. Well, the Speaker's rulings say that you shouldn't do it. Different MPs have done it differently at different times. I've always been of the view that you shouldn't.
I understand there's a special Haka plan for tomorrow that actually will name you and other government ministers. Is that appropriate?
Well, absolutely, if it's done in a way that is an expression, but not one that's an expression designed to get in other people's faces and frustrate the rules of Parliament and debate. Because when someone tries to get out of their seat, get in your face and stop you from expressing freely your thoughts, they're actually stopping the people that vote from you having their views represented in our Parliament. What sets us apart as a society is that we allow each person to have one vote to elect a person to represent them so that they can be spoken for without fear or favour. That is parliamentary democracy at its core. What you saw is a violation of that, and that's why it's so serious.
So if they had a Haka from their seats, if they had the Haka from their seats, would you be okay with that?
Well, put it this way, there's a very big difference between doing a haka in your seat and getting out of your seat and getting in someone else's face. But I make the second point to you that one of the purposes of Parliament is that you actually carry out a vote and the votes count towards making the laws of New Zealand. Now, if a person can stand up and do a haka in coordination with the public gallery to prevent the votes being recorded, then you are also frustrated. Okay, well, that's the answer I'm giving. I'll take a question from someone else, yeah. Beg your pardon?
Should members of the hīkoi else be allowed into public galleries?
Well, look, the rules of Parliament are very clear. If you've been involved in a protest, you can't enter the parliamentary building for 24 hours, so that's already factored in.
How do they, I guess, figure out who has been part of that protest?
Well, usually it's obvious because they're waving flags, but look, I guess it's up to the parliamentary security to enforce that.
So Chris Hipton said that he was going to join the protest, and the Green Party said that they're joining the protest. So are they going to be banned? Do you expect them to be banned?
Well, we're talking about the public gallery, not the ability to sit in your seat as a Member of Parliament. But I just make the point, I think the Labour Party's got a really big choice here. They voted against the motion to suspend Hana-Rawhiti Maipi-Clarke. I actually think that shows where the Labour Party is standing. They think the behaviour is okay rather than supporting the Speaker to uphold the standards of Parliament. I think that's a real problem for the Labour Party. They've got to decide if they believe in rational and reasonable debate, if they're actually going to undermine the Speaker and vote against the suspension. Well, they had a choice and they made it. Yeah.
Were against something different than was in the bill. Do you acknowledge that there are people on your side of the debate that are not aligned with what's actually in the bill and are fighting for something quite different?
Well, no, I don't. I mean, if you give me an example, then I'll be happy to talk about it. But
example, speaking to farmers, they say that they're upset with the consenting by local council, which comes from free rights. They're supportive of changes with the treaty, but they don't exactly know how this bill will help them. They are supportive of some sort of change. Will this bill help with the consenting of farmers through their local council?
Ultimately it will, because the Resource Management Act has been made to follow the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, which at the moment says that there's a partnership between races in New Zealand, and therefore you have to consult both treaty partners. I was talking to a developer just the other day trying to develop property and make the country a better place so people can have homes and so forth. They said that there were 3 iwi required to be consulted, 2 supported it, 1 didn't, a 4-year delay on getting that consent. So yes, this will actually have an effect in the way that we think about New Zealand. In fact, it's a good example of why this is so important, because I'd say one of the biggest problems for Māori, young Māori, is actually lack of housing, lack of secure housing. A lot of poorer people go into a different school each term because they don't have security of tenure, getting respiratory diseases because they have poor housing. If we could get our resource management laws to make it easier to get stuff built, that would be good for poorer Māori, probably less good for those who are currently being consulted but holding up development.
I guess another example would be there will be people out there who supported ACT's version of the bill before it was narrowed down, particularly in Article 2. So those supporters, are they on the wrong track as well, or is it just the ones on the other side that want something different?
Well, if you look at what we're achieving here, it's a public discussion that everyone can participate in to define the treaty principles in law, and not as a partnership but as something that gives equal rights to all. Now, there'll be people who will argue around the details of that, but that is substantively the same as the document that ACT put out 2 years ago.
So it doesn't really matter to you what the end result of this is. The only thing that matters to you is having a discussion about it.
No, I just said it's critical that it's defining the principles in law and they give people equal rights, and that New Zealand is not conceived as a partnership under the treaty. That's critical, and that stays.
I guess on your side of the argument too, there will be people who think it should go much further, and there are people out there who don't believe that the treaty settlement process should still exist, which isn't what you believe, from what I understand. So do you acknowledge that there are people on both sides of this that are arguing outside the scope?
Yeah, look, I've heard people argue that the treaty settlements were a mistake. I think they're a triumph for New Zealand. I think few countries could have or would have gone through the process of reconciliation that we have, and ACT voted for every treaty settlement. So if you're supporting ACT and you don't agree with treaty settlements, then there's a little bit of dissonance there. No, it says that you have access to the rights that were available in 1840, and if you owned property in 1840 and that was wrongly taken from you, you could still seek redress, as is basically what's happened in the last 30 years. Beg your pardon? So, you mean prior to 1840 or beyond? Right.
Well, for example, the Tainui settlement has dealt with the confiscation of land, and that deals with event post-1840.
Well, all treaty settlements deal with events post-1840. It doesn't extend prior to that, and that's why the recent case around the top of the South Island has been explicitly ruled by the judges not to be a treaty issue. It actually involved events that occurred in 1839, and therefore it's been done on the basis of English common law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is you seem to be trying to perhaps undermine some of the numbers in the protest by saying that not everyone there actually understands what they're there for. And what I'm trying to understand from you is whether you acknowledge that on both sides there are people who aren't exactly fighting about exactly what you want.
Oh, look, I have no doubt that people engaged in a political debate come at it from a range of different angles, but what I do know is that when people have read out the principles that my bill proposes, New Zealanders support them by a ratio of nearly 2 to 1. Beg your pardon?
Are you expecting supporters of the bill to be out in numbers tomorrow?
No, I suspect that most people will just be off to work and getting on with their day, but there's a group of people who feel very strongly about this, and that's why they've had a hīkoi.
Do you acknowledge that there's confusion though of people who want some sort of reform on the treaty, but they don't actually know what the practical implications of this bill is beyond the fact that it is going to, you just use the phrase, will have equal rights to everyone. But that answer is an example. They support change, but they're not hearing from you what exactly that change for them will be. It's confusing.
Well, I don't really think so at all. I think if you take something like resource consenting, we need to get back to the simple idea that you have a right to develop and use your property, and the only time someone has a right to object is if it directly affects their property, regardless of the identity of that person. Under that sort of conception, you get resource management laws that are going to be far more conducive to developing property and ultimately creating greater wealth, which will solve a whole lot of the problems, particularly for younger, poorer Māori, of whom there's a lot who could do with, better housing, for example. I think it actually is thuggery, yes, to say that you're going to use force and intimidation, getting in someone's faces, physical actions over words in a place that is clearly set out to be a chamber of debate. That is thuggery.
Have you had any discussions with either national or first since the introduction of the bill about what's going to happen to it from now on, in particular Select?
I have, but I understand that the Select Committee's been meeting and made decisions about the next steps, but I also, while we're all talking about the rules of Parliament, know that I'll get in big trouble if I reveal information that another MP might have told me about those proceedings.
But you're confident that you might be able to turn their, or persuade them, after all the speeches in the first reading, that they won't support it in second reading? Are you holding out hope that they can do it?
Well, I think the New Zealand people can, and what I'm hearing is the more people look at this, they say, actually, I've read the bill, I've been to treaty.nz, I actually think that this is a good idea, and it's the people who have the ability to persuade political parties.
Clarke once described the LCP protesters as haters and wreckers. How would you characterise this?
Look, I actually had a lot of time and respect for Helen Clark, but that's not a phrase I would use really for any group, and not for this hīkoi.
How would you characterise it?
Look, it's a group of people who have, I think, quite a range of grievances, different government policies and perhaps even some world events. This has brought them together and given them some purpose. I also think you can't ignore the really active role that one political party, Te Pāti Māori, has played in organising, or some would say orchestrating it, particularly Eru Kapakingi, who's the former candidate, son of Māori Party MP, and as far as we know, current parliamentary staffer. So to some extent it is something that's been organised by Te Pāti Māori, but nonetheless, if it looks like a peaceful protest, they've got a right to do it.
Using words like thuggery and harmony or division?
If it's an accurate description of something we need to talk about, then it ultimately gets us to greater harmony. What would be worse is to watch those kinds of actions and not call them out.
Would you call Julianne Genter a thing?
Beg your pardon?
Would you call Julianne Genter a thing?
I think what she did had an element of thuggery in it, yes. I mean, she went over, instead of staying in her seat and debating the way everyone else in the history of our parliament seems to have managed to do, she had to go over, get in his face and wave her book at him. I think that's wrong. Yeah.
For a respectful, reasonable debate, is using words like thuggery a reasonable and respectful?
Well, if it's an accurate description of the person's actions, then unfortunately, yes. Do you believe it's not an accurate description? I mean, I don't know how you describe it.
Do you think that losing support from its base by blocking out supporting this bill as a second reading against all supporters, do you think some people will be unhappy with that?
Look, ultimately, it's up to each voter what's important to them. ACT takes a very clear position. We believe that it's not enough to do case by... No, I think that they're still on a bit of a journey. And look, it may ultimately turn out that New Zealand is not in a good enough place to have this conversation. But sooner or later, we'll have to choose, does our treaty divide us into two collectives based on ancestry, or give us universal human rights? Well, certainly amongst the polling that I've seen, that would seem to be true.
Wellington said this is not just an academic exercise, this is about a founding document, it's about what New Zealand is. How do you respond?
Well, it's a shame because Chris usually likes an academic exercise. But look, he's right, and in my conversations with Chris over the years, he actually recognises that there's an issue, but he seems to have clammed up recently, but it's up to him.
Can you elaborate on the poll that you were just talking about?
Well, it's a Curia poll, I think, released in October, which says that I think National Party voters by a ratio of 3.6 to 1 or something favour the principles. So.
What in particular did you have a problem with what Jenny Shepherd said?
What she said. Look, I think for a former Prime Minister to say that a politician sincerely advancing a policy position is somehow invoking what she said. I think it's totally irresponsible, because it suggests that a justifiable response to ideas you don't like is violence. And I think that that is a really irresponsible position for someone who should be a senior stateswoman in this country to take. But hey, look, you know, this is the same Jenny Shipley who once said in Parliamentary debate, I understand that Pacific Island men will climb through your bedroom window. She's the same Jenny Shipley who was a director, I see Richard Harman nodding there, she's the same Jenny Shipley who was a director of Main Freight and was trading when insolvent. So, you know, I used to quite like her, but that's 3 incidents, including those comments, that make me take her a little bit less seriously, and that's a shame.
As much as you believe in the cause, do you think it is also responsible to go forward with the conversation without recognising the deep feeling and division that it is causing?
Well, I would argue that the division is already there. So you say my bill is causing division. I would say it's revealing division that's built up over several decades, including when Jenny Shipley and Chris Finlayson were in power, because they have this conception of our country as a partnership between 2 groups based on ancestry. I think that's wrong. I think that has led to division. I'm revealing it, yes, but I'm not causing it as you claimed.
In an era of polarisation and where people have fewer trust in institutions, is it the right time to, if it is a division that is laid out of service for a long time, is now the right time to bring that to the surface and instead of polarisation?
Well, I mean, it's not clear that there's going to be a better time. If you could give me an argument that, you know, not now, David, but next year will be a great time, then that would be a useful discussion to have. But I don't think anyone's in a position to say that. Well, that's very evident from a historical record. My question is, what does it mean to us today? And I would argue it's a compact that gives us all universal human rights. All right. Well, okay, you got one more. This will be the last one.
I'm just going to ask, has the national conversation so far been what you were looking for or what you're expecting?
Look, obviously there's actions people have taken that I think are pretty regrettable, but the people responsible for those actions, such as the behaviour of Te Pāti Māori last week, it's the responsibility of the people that took the actions, not of anyone else. They have to be held accountable. It strikes me that they're often held to a lower standard, including by themselves. That's regrettable. But actually, what we now have is more people talking about the treaty, and this basic question of does it make us a group of people with equal rights, or is it this compact between 2 collectives based on ancestry? That is a conversation that New Zealand needs to have sooner or later, and I actually am glad that we are having it. All right, team. Oh, sorry, Brett. Yeah. Well, I've always said, you know, if he's not doing any harm, don't fix it. So I've always been a bit neutral on the Republican monarchist debate. But you're absolutely right about that. But I just make the point that right through our public policy, this current conception of the treaty principles means that you have a separate healthcare system, it means you have co-governance of 3 waters, it means you have resource management, it means you have 2 versions of curricula, you've got, you know, school boards required to uphold the Treaty of Waitangi and do a whole lot of things other than education as a result. So, you know, while King Charles may be a hereditary monarch, he's not doing any of that, whereas our current conception of the Treaty of Waitangi is. All right, thank you, folks. We'll see you later.